Good afternoon. Welcome in this session. We're going to give you a good vision on how we see cloud, the evolution of cloud, and eventually how you could implement a private cloud also. So we have two speakers here today. We have first Bernard Drost, who is our VP at CTP, Cloud Technology Partners, which is a company we bought 7 months ago. Thank you, Bernard. And secondly, we have Matthew, who is a sales expert in our organization in building up, well, what we call private clouds, but based on a cloud experience, what we call GreenLake. So, Bernard, I leave.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. So about 7 months ago, we were acquired by HPE. We only did public cloud, so Azure, Amazon, Google. But we never had a good story about if you go on that cloud journey, what do you do with the stuff that has to stay on premise? And so now with the advent of having an integrated story with HPE, we have a much better end-to-end story. But my portion is kind of focusing mostly on public cloud, but it really applies to pretty much private, public, so it doesn't really make a difference. So, but you know, that's just the preface of this. But I wanted to start with this picture, and you all have one of these in your pockets, right? Or in your bag, and you know, it holds a certain amount of data. But this is what your data center of the future is going to look like. It will fit on here. Because every cloud nowadays, if it's on-premise or off-premise, is all API driven, right? So you can explain everything and you can provision everything through the API with code. So I need to do my networking. I can do that through the API. And so there's a whole bunch of things. I think that's at the end. But everything, the nice thing is you can now do this through code. And you know, you have probably heard the story about infrastructure as code. DevOps, containers, all those really good things. But the nice thing is you can now express it through code. You can develop it as code. And therefore, everything you do in the cloud, you can actually log. So you made a change, we can log it. You added a VM, we can change. You changed the VM, we can log it. So the good thing is the instrumentation becomes much easier. So your operations, so day 2 support, also needs to change. So cloud is not only a technology problem, as you all know. There's people involved. There is new processes. Your security measures may need to be different and should be different. You know, everything in the cloud you should encrypt, especially public cloud. So there's really, you know, that's kind of the new concept that I wanted to that's my first premise. And hopefully you agree. If you don't agree, please let me know. But the other major, let me do 2 things. The other thing I think is, so I started doing cloud about 8 years ago, which is quite a long time. Nobody really knew what cloud was back then. And I think you see in the middle, lower cost, that was 7 years ago. That was the main premise. I want to move out of my data center, it's going to be cheaper. And then everybody started doing the lift and shift, and it's actually more expensive. Because what you had in-house, it didn't run well, it's going to run worse on the cloud. Private or public, doesn't matter. And probably on public, it's going to be even worse because the infrastructure that it now resides on is actually less reliable. So if your application crashes, you can't get it back up easily in the cloud. And therefore, if you can automate it, then it becomes easier again. But what we see now is that people are not going to the cloud for cost. So cost is always important, right? But it's now all about speed to market, agility, innovation. You want to bring out a new product to your customers, maybe you can do it faster. And you should be able to do it faster on the cloud because you can now maybe release smaller things. Like Amazon Web Service, they release 1,000 new features every year, 3 a day. So how do you get there as an organization? It's really hard. Agile, you know, new software technologies like open source. It's a hard thing for big enterprises with an IT infrastructure to kind of move their internal people, move their internal organization into that new world. And we, as CTP and now HPE, we try to help our customers basically accelerate the adoption of that cloud. Just a quick example. So the FINRA is a financial institution in the US. I think they actually also regulate other financial institutions. And for them, when they went to the cloud, I think the first one, again, I said cost is not important, but yes, they did save a lot of cost. But the second one was much more important. They could do things, in this case it says 400 times faster than they could do in the past. So if you need a VM, the VM can be up in an hour. And before, it took them 9 months, right, to get a machine up and running. They needed to change a rule in the firewall, right? Of course, it has to go through due process, but the actual doing it is seconds, right? And that's what their main benefit was, is that they could do things faster. GDPR is coming around. I'm not sure how many of you need to adhere to that. A lot of people have trouble because their internal IT system can't either fast enough change to be able to adhere to GDPR, or it's just impossible, right? If you're a financial institution, you also have to do FRTB, it's called. You have to log everything that you do that made a trade happen. Well, now you have a big data problem. Where are you going to store it? So storage, I think, is the age-old problem, and it doesn't go away. It only gets worse. I think the third myth, that I'd like to dispose of is cloud inherently will be cheaper eventually. Right? It's like creating another data center. If the straight line is your normal IT costs, and usually they rise over time, if you create a cloud data center or you go to the cloud, you have to invest. There's some pre-planning, you have to do some analysis, you have to do migration. So during the time that you have dual hardware running at the same time, of course it's going to be more expensive, right? But there's going to come a time, and usually it depends on here it says about 8 quarters. I think we can probably condense it to probably 5 to 6 now. That's where you see that the operational cost, the running cost, is going to become lower than what you can do on premise. And that's also why FINRA said 40% cheaper, but they're, right, that's probably over here somewhere, right? So they had a relatively long runway already that they're doing this. So those are kind of some things I want to put in your mind. If you go to your management, you want to do cloud, you know, there are some things that you need to think about. So these are hopefully some good points. So now how do we actually help our customers? And again, it doesn't make a difference if it's public cloud, private cloud, consumption-based infrastructures. So we like to do a workshop to kind of really understand what is it that you want to accomplish, right? If it is pure cost saving that is your strategy, then the way we do the rest is different, because then we may do more kind of the lift and shift. But if it's more agility, then we may do a little bit more tinkering with your applications to make them more cloud ready, and thus being able to release more often. So it depends really what is your strategy, and that's what that workshop is all about. Then, of course, we need to understand what do you have? What do you like to move? What can move first? Right? So that's all around the assessment plan. Of course, then you need to build stuff and do things, you know, that it runs. And then day 2 support, which is, sorry, I'm standing in the way. There's an optimization phase. Initially, when you go to the cloud, you probably do a like for like from infrastructure. But then you see that you're actually using much less of the infrastructure that, you know, usually you over provision in-house. You do it initially in the cloud because, you know, that feels comfortable. But then you should do a session that says, okay, I'm only using 30% of this particular service, so maybe I can make them 30% smaller. This whole section of service is actually not doing anything during the night. Let me shut it off. My test environment doesn't have to run every day of 365 days a year. Maybe I can shut that off. And that's how you can achieve that 40% savings. And that's very important, that you think about, you know, IT differently. I won't bore you with all the details, but as you think about this, there's a lot of things that you need to think about going to cloud in general. Security usually is the first one, right? How secure is cloud? If it's in your own data center, you understand how secure it is. When you go public cloud, now you have to create new things. Application architectures, certain things like I have a customer now that has Sybase on Solaris. Well, there's no cloud that runs Sybase on Solaris right now. So what do? Right? So those are things that you need to start thinking about. DevOps, I've heard very different definitions of DevOps. For me, DevOps is taking out waste in a process. So if I'm a developer and I need a piece of hardware or a server, usually I request it today and maybe a week later it's there. So what do I do in that week? Or I have a system that needs to be tested, but it takes 2 weeks to get the test system up and running. What do they do for 2 weeks? So if you can minimize that waste, that's what I see. That's what DevOps, that's where DevOps is trying to be really strong. So DevOps is not, I don't do DevOps. DevOps is more of a thinking. How can you take waste out of your things? Last part, and then I'll leave it up to some questions. If you have questions, we can also have Matthew go, and then we can do questions at the end. It's really how you like to do it. Case studies is always kind of very, I like case studies because it really shows kind of what we did. So let me start here, and you probably heard it in the keynote. Agriculture is really starting to use this thing called IoT, right? Internet of Things. So Land O'Lakes is a very big, so they're most known in the US especially for butter. They make these square butter sticks, and if you ask someone in the US, if you say Land O'Lakes, they say butter. But they actually grow a lot of seeds and grains and all those things. So they have about 1 million acres that they grow things on, and it's all distributed all over the states in America. So we actually used Google for this one to plot where are all these little plots of land. And then we instrumented the seed. We put sensors in the seed. We put sensors in the ground. We put sensors on the tractors that is actually harvesting the grain. And then ultimately, we also got weather data. We got other different types of data. And what they want to become, instead of a consumer of data, they want to become a provider of data. They want to go to the Chicago Mercantile Exchange and say, hey, I know how much, say, the orange crop is going to be yield this year, right? That's valuable information for a lot of people. So instead of becoming a consumer, they want to become a producer. And to do that, they went to Google Cloud in this case. They're using some of the AI modules, some of the self-learning things to really start predicting if it is a dry season this year, right? And this plot of land happens to be a little bit more wet, then you get similar yields that if it's a dry patch and it rains a lot that year, right? So they're trying to create correlations between those type of things, and that's predicting where the yield is going to go next. The other thing which I really like is Avid. Avid makes, or actually edits Hollywood movies. They have software that can edit Hollywood movies. So you can only imagine how much storage they need for one film, right? They shoot, 100 hours of film, and then needs to be condensed into, say, 2 hours. And then you have the music, and then you have to synchronize it, and all those things. So they had a rising storage cost of about 150% year over year. We took them to Amazon, and that basically reduced that particular expense about 50%. I think I said this morning 25, but it's about 50%. So the storage cost that they now consume on Amazon Web Services is 50% less than they used in the past. So what they're doing now is using that money that originally they were spending on their colo provider, they can now spend on business added value things. They're still spending the money, but not anymore on just storage. And again, the good thing is for them, they went to Amazon, but they could have done this with GreenLake on-premise as well. It's just the technology wasn't there yet when we did this. Is probably 5 years ago. So that technology didn't exist yet. So we happened to take them to Amazon. And of course, we were the public cloud people as well, so that's why we took them to Amazon. But it doesn't make a difference. You can do this on-premise or off-premise. That's the cool part. For me, I'm a technologist, so this is cool for me. The last one, and this also kind of gives you an idea of the different phases that companies go through. You have, you want to kind of modernize your apps. So that's kind of what Avid wanted to do, and that's what they achieved. Then you potentially, when you build new apps, you want to make them cloud native. On-premise, off-premise, doesn't matter, but so that you can easily move them depending on maybe where it's cheaper to run. Maybe tomorrow it's HPE, maybe the day after it's Azure, right? So is there a way, if you make them cloud native, so that you can move them around much more? This is a credit card company. For them, it was all about how do I do security? How do I protect it, sorry. So they put firewalls between every server and every tier in their server, and they encrypt everything. And that's possible now in the cloud, which is nice. And then, especially for convergence, there happened to be a financial services company. It was all about how do I organize now my new ops, my day two. because we can instrument everything, every change in your environment. You bring up a server, you bring down a server, you know what happened. So now the ops becomes much more interesting. You can do actually, so we have one customer there, they call it operational excellence. So they want to do what they do for their customers. They also want to look internally on their own hardware, virtual hardware, and they want to make sure that everything runs like they would run it for a customer. Really interesting stuff. I think that was the last one. Yes. So any quick questions that I can answer, or shall we give it to Matthew, who's going to talk a little bit more about the more consumption-based kind of cloud infrastructure? Good. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, and my contact details is on the next slide. If
Yeah, indeed. All right, so I'm Matthew Naunton. I've been at HP for 12 years now. And I think what I've seen when I moved into this role 4 years ago was we had $50 million worth of assets written. And in that 4 years, that's now grown to 1.25 billion. So whilst I'm not able to predict the Dow opening price tomorrow, one thing I can predict is that we're going to continue to grow. I think we've got 7 years worth of history that we're just building on constantly. We're making strategic investments to continue to support that growth. I think one of the things we're seeing is that actually the on-premise consumption is really helping customers who are on a journey to the cloud, don't necessarily want to put everything into an AWS or Google or Azure, but want to keep things under their control. And we're starting to really make sure we're seeing it's really resonating with customers. One of the things that we constantly gauge ourselves on is our Net Promoter Score. So our Net Promoter Score is actually almost double Apple's Net Promoter Score. So again, we're getting reassurance from our customer base that again, everything we're doing is going in the right direction. And I think one of the things that we are proud of actually at HPE is the fact that we have referenceability in every vertical, whether you're an FSI customer, logistics, you're a retailer, or you're public sector. We've got great referenceability from our 425 customers. And we're seeing actually, we're winning a lot of new business based on strong referenceability. So just tell a little story actually about my grandfather 50 years ago was in his garden tending to his roses, talking to his neighbor who was a technologist, and they both worked at the same bank. My grandfather was the area director at the time, the neighbor was the chief technologist. 50 years ago, he came up with an idea that they were going to implement the first, the problem was, they'll go back to the problem statement, which was when the bank closed at 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, you couldn't get your money until 9 o'clock on Monday morning when the bank opened. So they decided to work with an inventor to develop the first cash machine, which was implemented 50 years ago. Now, that project, my grandfather assures me, was one of the hardest ones he ever had to fight through to get through. So he had to go to the board, he had to get sponsorship, he had to get funding. It's a really big IT investment. And all this was before the advent of email as well, so it's probably a lot harder to do than it would be today. And certainly there's no tweeting about it either. But what they built that day was a mechanism to enable people to actually use technology to enable themselves to access cash over a weekend. And I think, looking back now, I have children, they're 7 and 9, and I don't think that my children are ever going to use a cash machine. They'll probably use their watch, might be outdated by the time they start to use money. They're probably going to use their finger or their eyeball to access their cash moving forward. So technology is real pace. So if you think about being a CIO in an organization, about how do you innovate, how do you deliver this element of change? When I went to the same bank 2 years ago and told the same story, the CTO of the bank said to me, we have 2,500 people employed to do just what your grandfather and his neighbor did over a garden fence. They talk, they create ideas, and we have to go and implement these ideas. So we have to learn to fail fast. We have to be able to seed proof of concept, we have to go and develop. So how can you help me do that, HPE? How can you actually support us in that? And we took the same story to CIO of a leading airport. And he said, look, we've just gone through this journey with Aruba. We've transformed away from a Cisco network. We've just implemented Aruba. So we've really developed our edge capability. And now what we want to do is start trialing how we can start to expand our business. So some of the things they're doing is when you go and check in, your bag goes through the carousel, it's photographed. And the reason they take every single bag is now photographed and logged. So if you're that passenger that is just going through security as a gate is closing, they know you've got no chance of making it to the gate. So when you go through security, if you haven't gone through security or you're just going through it, they send an image to the ground crew who now take your bag out of bay 3. They know it's a blue bag with a pink strap, and they take it straight off the plane. So when you get to the gate and you're late and your bag's there, so you don't feel quite so bad that your bag's gone on somewhere else, but you haven't missed the flight. But more importantly, the airline has got off before you were late. So that's something that has really helped to transform that airline. The other thing they're doing, using the same sort of technology and the proof of concepts, is they're experimenting with things like autonomous vehicles. They're experimenting with drones, trying to work out how they can keep more aeroplanes in the air, and they could keep testing the runway to make sure the runway is still fit for purpose and make sure they're making massive developments there. And the other interesting thing they're trying to do, which I find relatively interesting, is bins. And when you go to the airport, they have to clean every single bin twice a day. Most of them are empty. So now what they're doing is they've got sensors in the bins, tell them when they're full, they only go and empty them when they're full. So again, they've just cut back their manpower there, which again is an interesting use of it. But again, it's another proof of concept little pilot that they experimented with. When we meet lots of customers, I think one of the underlying things that HPE always gets is, why don't you have a public cloud offer yourself? You're big enough, you're empowering it, why don't you do that? And we never have, and we've made a strategic decision too, because I think we believe hybrid is the way forward. And we're supporting, obviously, a lot of the likes of Azure, et cetera, as well anyway. But I firmly believe that actually we have a role here that is developing your own private cloud, giving you that hybrid. Very few customers are 100% public cloud. The majority of them have a mix. I think certainly with the workshops we run, there's that capability to actually make sure we're putting the right workload in the right location for you, under the right banner. And I think we recognize that you've actually done it like this for years. And actually, it's pretty much worked really well for you. There's been a few challenges along the way, but actually doing stuff yourself on-premise has been a great solution for deploying IT. And maybe for most organizations, moving a lot of things to the public cloud where it's out of your control, you could have GDPR issues, is probably a stretch too far. And I think where we've been really successful with our 400 plus customers is absolutely addressing the middle ground, where we are enabling all of the public cloud experience. Now, what does that really mean? That means you can reduce your cost, you can reduce your risk, and you can increase your time to market by having the right flexible infrastructure delivered through a private cloud on-premise. When we went to the bank, the bank said to us, look, for us, our challenge, and it's exactly what Bernard was suggesting earlier, is we're moving to AWS for a specific reason. And that specific reason is it takes us 93 days. When we qualified that was 93 working days as well, to actually deploy capacity to our users. So we have 2,000 staff that come to us with these brainwaves, these ideas of how we can increase and drive value. Now, we tell them, wait in line. It's like, the story he told us was like, the analogy he used was, we tell them to wait at a petrol station. We bring down the barrier. We go around with a clipboard and we ask how many servers, how much storage do you need? When we've got enough requests, we phone the tanker, which is HPE. You get 2 weeks. You get 2 weeks lead time for the capacity to come in. Then you've got 6 weeks for us to get it into the data center and working. And then we open the barrier. We invite the people in to use the services, hopefully, and hopefully they haven't gone and put stuff on their credit card in the interim. And then what we do is we close the barrier, start the process again, and that's 93 days is our time to value. So if you come to us at the end of that cycle, you've got a pretty good turnaround. But if you come to us at the beginning, you've got an awfully long wait. So, and he said, look, and he drew, basically, this is my big step. We make a big investment, we take time. We've also done a lot of work with Research 451, and their view is that most organizations massively over-provision. So compute, 59% over-provision, 48% for storage. And we're seeing that the more and more we talk to people, which is, again, another reason why people are sort of trying to jump onto the cloud bandwagon. And I think what we're saying and we said to the bank is, all we want to do is just start really small. Let's create some agile infrastructure, some nimble, composable infrastructure that we can just grow as and when you require it. That's all we do. We just build onto it. We've got the right price points. We've got a really good, strong cost offer. We know that we've got the right metering software because we made the right investments in that product a few years ago. And we're just growing that footprint as and when they want it. And we're actually helping them collapse their time to market. And again, it's all resonated really well. But what really hit home is when we started doing the financial analysis and saying, look, you've got 5 million you're going to spend on tin today. When you look at the business case for this, and we'll touch on some of it in a minute, you're going to make significant savings here. And they're talking 40-50% savings against just putting stuff into their own data center. So, and then when we've done work with Research 451, who also run the TCO tool for AWS, they've stated that we are at worst price parity with public cloud through our on-premise, and in most cases we're actually better at delivering a TCO saving. So I said right at the start that we continue to evolve and continue to develop, and I think, had you been at Discover this year, there's a lot of discussion around our GreenLake solutions and GreenLake offers. So we recognize that we are very good at delivering hybrid infrastructure. We're very good at delivering infrastructure as a service to our customers. We've been doing that for years. And now our customers in the feedback we're giving is how do we develop this story? How do we take complexity? So if everyone has backup, what do you do? What are the questions you ask around what backup provider, what type of software it's going to go onto? How are you going to do it? These are all problems that we can just take away because we just deliver backup as a service paid for when you write backups to disk, and we manage it on your behalf. Really simple evolution of the service. Exactly the same. We can build really strong and very quick ROIs against Oracle using EDB. Again, we know customers have challenges with Oracle. We know Oracle licenses are very expensive and are very hard to maintain and manage. Again, putting on a service as a platform, just moving away as a service. Very easy, very quick to consume. And again, we've got some great referenceability there. And certainly with SAP HANA, last year I had the pleasure of actually deploying the largest SAP HANA into a law firm, multinational law firm. Worked with a partner to do that. And it was a really easy sell actually, because the customer knew flexible capacity. They wanted to move to SAP, modernize a law firm. Their bread and butter is paper. And yet we're going to ask them to move to SAP. It's a huge leap forward. But the managing partner had confidence that we've been delivering IT infrastructure into their organization for years, had confidence to move forward. And it was actually a relatively easy transition and a hugely successful win for us. So what I want to do is just take you through some of the things that when we've run a workshop, some of the outputs are some of these. So one thing you would have noticed, there's been no technology slides here at all, but I think what we're trying to do here is focus on actually what are the benefits you're going to get here. And I think certainly the key thing for me is we absolutely collapse the provisioning. So if we look across the 425 customers we've got, most of these customers are operating at a high level, over 80-90% utilization. Again, knowing that we've got enough buffer in the environment to maintain that headroom, maintain growth. When a lot of our customers started, a lot of them were below 45-50% utilization. So a big dial to transform. So if you imagine taking half of your data center out as you modernize and you move forward, huge TCO savings to be made there. All of our customers give us feedback that they've collapsed their provisioning time. We have the world's largest investment bank. They provision capacity in 23 minutes, and the vast majority of that 23 minutes is spent getting the internal approval to spin something on, not to actually use the use the virtual machine we've created for them. We have the transparency to give you a bill, which is a simple P times Q. What's the price at a unit rate times the quantity of stuff being consumed, whether that's a per gigabyte written, whether that's a virtual machine, or whether that's actually a physical server. Really simple, granular level of billing, which you can then go and use, enhance, and build upon for your own internal cross-charging. So we're giving really good transparency there and actually making predictability. And I think one of the things that we often overlook is that we can take a private cloud, build the infrastructure for you, and translate that into 4 unit rates. And that unit rate is for growth. So as you grow, you benefit from a cheaper unit rate. So as you're adding capacity into these environments, and most of these do grow at above 20% year on year, you get a benefit of a cheaper unit rate, again, which most finance teams actually like and procurement really like. And I think when we start to build the bigger picture, we really do hone in on how are we actually impacting the business. My very first meeting was with the CEO of Telefonica, and fascinating discussion. He was about to go and spend 10 million on building this Skype as a service offer that we want to take to market. He's now created a video reference story for us, because actually what we said to him is, look, we will underpin this with a small footprint on day one. We'll give you a cost per Skype seat as a bundle package, and you can grow and scale into this as you demand. And he said, look, I really like this. Went back to head office in Spain, raised one business case for the 10 million, put it into the environment, and then we just literally, every time they win a new customer, they sign a change order, we grow and scale the business. Really simple. What he's done there is he's collapsed what we call, it's an American cheesy game show called the Supply Chain Challenge, where you bring together, the business has a demand, then you have to bring together procurement, you have to bring together finance, you have to bring together legal, and 93 days later, you may have won, and you may have a server in your data center. But in this Telefonica example, he collapsed that by getting the foundation right at the start, creating the right business model internally. So it worked really well for him. And I'd say we have great referenceability. This one's a Danish supermarket leading the way here. We also have the world's largest investment bank. We have the world's largest retail bank. We have the world's fastest growing retailer. We have we have really good referenceability across all sectors and across healthcare as well. So with that, I would like to thank you. And if there's any questions, please feel free.